Well, good day, folks. Welcome to the MB Wildman channel. On today's video, we're going to do an excerpt from a series called Focus on Trapping. Now, this was a DVD series put out years ago to train people how to trap, so it's great for the beginner, also great for the experienced trapper that wants just a little bit of a refresher or some new ideas for sets or anything like that. If you like the channel, enjoy the videos, please consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, focus on trapping.
Now, ice has formed on all the streams, and the snow is gradually piling up. Beaver avoid coming out during the winter, for when they do, they are very vulnerable to their predators and to the cold. Look, the beaver house. The beaver have finished storing up food and have put the final layers of mud on their houses. It's easy to tell if a house is empty or inhabited. Beaver leave clear signs of their presence. Air bubbles seen through the ice are excellent clues. They not only tell us that beaver are present, but also indicate that there is a channel directly underneath. Late in the fall, beaver concentrate their activities around their dam, house, feed bed, and burrows. They are dependent on these for survival. The house and burrows are therefore good places to find beaver. The animal visits them daily, whether in open water or under the ice. Burrows are generally located on either side of the lodge, close to the dam. Each burrow has its own entrance, while the lodge may have up to 6, all underwater, of course. Have you ever asked yourself how the beaver, which is very short-sighted, in fact practically blind, manages to find the entrances to the house? Given the fact that the animal travels primarily at night and that a thick layer of ice covered with snow blocks out all the light, you may wonder if it has a sixth sense. And the answer is no. In fact, beaver create an underwater network of channels. Since they always use the same route, channels form in the bottom. Guided by these furrows, the beaver follows its own trail back to the different entrances. But how can we, in turn, find these channels? In open water, before the ice is formed, they can be seen with the naked eye. Or in a small boat or on foot, you can test the bottom with a pole and feel out the shape of the channel. Some trappers pull on big rubber boots and use their feet to locate the beaver's channels. Right around the entrances to the burrows and lodge, the ice stays quite thin, since the constant activity of the beaver in these areas keeps it from freezing solid. When there is a lot of snow, find these entrances by testing the ice with your ice chisel. Be sure to do a good job of cleaning the site where you intend to set the trap so that nothing will interfere with its operation. This trapper with his big boots is checking out the bottom material. This is an important detail, since the trap must be placed as close to the bottom as possible. Although it may seem foolish to play in the water like this in the middle of winter, it's an excellent method. I myself go trapping in hip waders. It works very well. It feels like having eyes at the bottom of your feet. And for those chilly types who are skeptical, remind yourselves that it is always warmer in the water than outside. One piece of advice, though, watch out for snags. Install the trap using 2 poles that are long enough to extend above the ice once the trap is in place. Keep these poles very level. The trap doesn't have to be set right at the house entrance. Sometimes I set my 330 or 280 conibear 1, 2, or 3 meters from the entrance. Next, slide the poles through the trap springs. The distance between the lower jaw of the trap and the end of the pole is determined by the bottom material. Once installed, the bottom of the trap must be 3 centimeters off the bottom. Slide the springs along the poles. Watch your fingers. The safety hooks have now been removed. Fasten the trap to the poles with a piece of wire about 1 meter long attach the loop of the spring, the pole, and the safety hook so that it won't slip to one side. Then bending the other pole over the trap as much as possible, do the same thing on the other side. Note that the trigger is centered in the lower part of the trap and that the two trigger wires are twisted into one. Now, this is simply because the beaver, when walking on the bottom, is often carrying branches in its teeth. If you place the trigger like this, you can ensure that the beaver springs the trap with its head rather than one of the branches. When the water isn't deep enough and there's a chance the springs may freeze if pulled up alongside the poles, I put them in a perfectly horizontal position and fasten some wire under the trap. Careful, there still has to be a space between the wire and the dog so it can move freely. In some places, where the bottom material is much too soft and muddy, I modify the system a bit. I insert a stick below the trap to prevent it from sinking into the mud. Now lower the whole assembly straight down, positioning it across the channel. To make sure there are no obstructions that may interfere with the trap, spin it around one full turn. The trap should be placed crossway and right in the middle of the channel. It doesn't matter if the channel is ½ a meter or 1 meter wide, the beaver will go right down the middle. There's no point blocking off the sides. Lengthen the chain with a long piece of wire attached to something solid. Run it along one of the poles and above the ice where you can find it easily and won't break it when you cut open the ice to check the trap. In open water, you can drive a pole firmly into the ground, as this trapper is doing, and wedge the other end in the X formed by the ends of the poles holding the trap. Later in the season, all you have to do is lay a stick on the ice and rest it between the two poles. To check your trap, take your ice chisel and lower it directly between the two poles until you touch the wire above the trap. When you feel the wire, lower the chisel a little further to touch the jaws. If you can't find them, it's a good sign the trap is closed. She recommends setting a 330 or 280 conibear with bait. The trapper places the trap quite near the feed bed. The beaver's movements are limited in winter. The animal must come across the bait as it makes its rounds. The trapper is fastening a forked aspen branch to a solid dry pole using 2 nails to keep it securely in place. The branch should not be longer than the width of the trap. Bait is used in a number of the winter trapping methods. It's easy to see why. Offering a beaver a piece of fresh aspen in the middle of its forced diet is a little like offering a gallon of water to someone who has been wandering in the desert for a week. This is because the beaver's only source of food during the winter is the branches it stockpiled in the fall. As time passes, the branches lose their freshness. Aspen is by far the beaver's favorite food, but it has the disadvantage of souring underwater. Normally, the springs are pulled up along the pole. In this case, however, our trapper has checked the depth of the water. It wasn't deep enough, and the raised springs would have frozen. He decided to position them horizontally and put the safety hooks where they would be out of the way. It's better to attach the trap chain to the lower spring at the bottom of the pole to prevent the dead beaver from floating to the surface and getting stuck under the ice. To make the trap more secure, you could also fasten the upper spring to the pole. The trigger is positioned just right. The trapper is sure of a proper catch. Drive the pole firmly into the stream bed, but first make sure you have removed the safety hooks. Now we go underwater to see the pieces of gnawed wood stuck under the ice. These are a good indication that there are beaver about. For the finishing touch, fasten the entire set to a stick lying across the ice. Cover the opening with some snow to slow down the freezing process and prevent light from shining into the water. It should be just as dark under the opening as it was before the trap was set. Otherwise, the beaver might wonder where the light is coming from. Good. Now everything seems ready. Let's hope the beaver likes it too. Here are the results. They weren't too long in coming. Our young trapper is going to be proud of her beaver. The beaver's pelt is at its prime in the beginning of the winter. You must be careful not to damage the fur when removing the animal from the trap. If it is frozen to the jaws of the trap, dip the beaver in water or use snow and the warmth of your hands to moisten and loosen the fur. When you are sure that no hairs are stuck to the metal, remove it from the trap. In late winter, the quality of the pelt castor glands have many uses. I always remove them when skinning my catch. They are located just above the anus. These musk glands, or castoreum, secrete a yellowish liquid which the beaver uses for one thing to mark out its territory, particularly during the mating season. In the fall, they can be used as a lure for beaver and many other fur bearers. When dried, they have a high market value. They are used in making perfume or medicine, or to fortify alcohol. You will also want to keep the beaver carcasses after skinning. They are excellent bait for most species of fur bearers and also feed many other animals which have a hard time surviving through the winter. The oil glands are located just below the castor glands. These glands contain an oily secretion that the beaver spreads on its fur. Although the oil glands are not as valuable as the castors these days, they are still used as a basic ingredient in many recipes for lures, including lures for lynx and marten. And just between you and me, try the oil as a treatment for hemorrhoids. Before I forget, a little trick. This is practical at the end of the day when your hands are tired or frozen. With this rope, your feet can do the work instead. Primarily, however, it can help you out if you're alone and get your hand caught in a trap. I always bring some along in my bag. You never know when it might come in handy. Here is our last trapping method, the snare. This is the method preferred by trappers who don't like carrying a lot of equipment about. Cut an opening close to the lodge and feed bed. He's zealous. The ice here seems a little too thick to be removed with a chisel, so he's decided to use a saw for the hardest part of the work. There must be a good 1.5 meters of water to set 4 snares.
Ça va être le temps de... Tu me donnes la pelle, je te donne l'air. Faut prendre la pesante. Comment qu'il y a notre creux?
Once the hole is made, this delicious treat, a big piece of aspen, is placed right in the center. I can't resist repeating this last piece of advice, unless it's meant as bait. Never use aspen, alder, willow, or any other wood that the beaver eats in your sets. Use dry or coniferous wood instead. This is known as a white glove operation, the height of refinement. First, fasten 2 snares, one above the other, on a solid dry pole. The metal cable used for the snares has several strands and should be quite stiff. It is commonly known as 1/16 or 3/64. You should use about 1 meter of cable to make a snare 25 centimeters in diameter. The stiff double wire holds the snare to the pole. Each snare has a lock that slides in one direction to close, but won't slide back the other way. The snare uses the same type of slide lock as the drowning system.
OK, Michel, serais-tu prêt à poser celui-là?
The 2 snares, set on the same pole, must be slightly overlapping so that the beaver can't pass between them. When in the water, they block the opening between the bait and the 2 dry poles. Ideally, the upper snare should be located about 8 centimeters below the ice, and the principle of this trap is to make the beaver go around the bait until it is caught in one of the snares. Finally, lay a stick across the ice and attach it to the 3 poles to prevent the opening from freezing too quickly. Simply cover it with coniferous branches and a good layer of snow.
A slight different approach to snare beaver is simply to use a dry wooden pole, which is the length of the depth of the water. And you put snares alternately around the pole so it covers up like a circle. To attract the beaver, you are to use a branch or twig of ideally poplar, which is the best species for beaver, the one he prefers. You put a bait on one side and a bait on the other side. So when the beaver approaches the set, you will circle around and get caught in 1 or maybe 2 snares. Now, a little detail is that the snare should be slightly overlapping one over the other, and this way he cannot escape in any way. You're sure he's gonna go inside at least one of the snare. And the bait should not exceed the distance of the snare from top to bottom. This set is placed under the ice nearby the feed bed.